Hey everybody, I'm Katallina, and today we're here to talk about episode 1 of Bye Bye Earth. In a song by the band Yes, called The More We Know, there is a line that says, "The evidence of our confusion, a life that's left its mark." And I can't think of any words more adequate to sum up exactly what I felt as I watched the first episode of this show, because this leading character, Belle, seems like she is extremely confused, and if she is extremely confused by the existence that she has lived, then my confusion as someone watching and seeing what's going on in this story is even more profound, because there is so much going on here, and there is so much to dig into here. And so much of it is merely on the surface, and we don't really entirely know potentially what to make of it. It definitely gives me the impression that this story is going to be a mystery, and that part of the joy of this show is going to be figuring that mystery out and piecing together exactly what has gone down here, because I am impressed by the overall characterization. I like the art style. I love the music, of course. I expected that. But I am left with so many questions. Why was Belle born out of this crystal? Was she natively born out of this crystal in this space, or did she come from somewhere else? In coming from somewhere else, did she travel through space and time, or is this some kind of prophecy? There are so many possibilities for the legend of her birth and what's going on there. So many questions regarding the sword. How did she end up in the place where the sword was? What compelled her to go near the sword? What made the sword react to her? Why did it choose her? Did it choose her, or was there some kind of other mechanism we don't know about? People were trying to attack her for having taken the sword. Why did they have the sword? Why was the sword hanging up in the air rather than being in a normal rack like a regular weapon would be? Why was it chained? How was she able to break the chains? What connection was there between her and the sword that made that possible? How did she actually end up being raised and stuff to get to the point where she was at, where that could even happen? And what was her life like with Xian? What was their actual existence like together? I mean, what did she really feel for him? We get a brief glimpse of their time together in this episode before everything goes down, but we really don't know just what kind of depths of emotion and connection she may have potentially lost. And why did she not understand all of the rules of this nomad thing that he was telling her about? Were they kept from her on purpose, or did she know and we as viewers don't necessarily know what she was aware of? Again, so many darn questions. But I do think there are some really interesting things going on here. I was a bit nervous when I first started looking at this show and was considering whether or not to watch it, especially based on the idea that identity was going to play such a major role in the storytelling. I'm somebody who is very cautious about the idea of identity being a big part of storytelling, especially in modern day, because when we talk about the concept of identity, which has been an aspect of storytelling for hundreds and thousands of years, the unfortunate reality in modern day is that we often end up talking about identity politics, which I don't generally feel does a lot of benefit for people, and I think it brings out the worst in people in most instances. So I'm very cautious when I see a story coming out with that. That said, my initial information was misinformed. I thought this was some form of original, and I'm like, oh my goodness, no. And then I found out later that no, this is based off of something that was written in the early to mid 2000s. So it's before a lot of the social and political stuff that's gone on in the past 10 to 15 years had really started in full and in earnest. So I felt a bit more comfortable with covering it because, as I just said, this is an issue that has reared its head throughout storytelling history, and it is something that's normally worth exploring, but I'm very cautious about how it will actually be tackled, and we'll have to see how things go. That said, I think they've done a generally good job. And I think it's very interesting how it happens to be, for whatever reason, that it is the large contingency of animalistic or anthropomorphic characters who seem to have these overriding prejudices against Belle, as opposed to Belle having those necessarily against these people. I think in part that's likely because they are the larger and majority faction, whereas she is generally on the receiving end of that behavior. And while she does seem to potentially feel some form of isolation or confusion, it wouldn't really be in her best interest to express any kind of direct negativity because the odds would be astronomically against her. Further, of course, it makes her a more likable and compassionate protagonist because, I'm sorry, but I would have no desire to follow a racist around. That'd be gross. And I mean, I'm not somebody who just drops that word at the tap of a hat. I mean, I'm talking true racism. I mean, that would be nasty. So that is a relief. I do think that it's also really interesting, though, that the way they introduce Belle to us is actually by having these people who openly have hostility and prejudice against her is needed to be able to resolve a problem that these people, for whatever reason, can't seem to resolve for themselves. Not because of their ethnicity. We learn that the teacher could have hypothetically taken care of this as far as his own ability, although we do find out eventually that he probably couldn't have because the curse he turns out to have had placed on him is that he can only teach, so he probably couldn't have fought that monster. We do realize that his actual race or ethnicity has nothing to do with that. That's totally to do with what his nomad curse ends up being. And it's incredibly interesting to see how different what happens to him is than what happens to Belle. Because his thing is that he can only teach, he can't actually do, if I understand what they were describing. Whereas Belle's situation is that Belle can no longer remember him, which really ties in with what was going on with her character and what her goals were, because in essence, she has sacrificed her present and past in order to create a potential for a new future. In going down this path as a nomad, she has given up the only existing family or connection that she had left in order to try and find out who she truly is. And I wonder, as she moves forward, whether that will be a question of finding actual people who look like her in a physical sense, or whether with time and patience what we'll see is her finding and building some form of found family. It'll be interesting to see exactly what kind of connection and what kind of place in the world she'll actually end up obtaining as the story continues. Because it seems that even on top of all of these things that are happening to Belle, there is another potential problem that is looming in the distance like a roaming thunder waiting to hit. And that is the reality that there is apparently a group who are potentially looking for Belle or people like Belle in order to have them be of use to their organization. And Belle wants no part of this. I don't know whether that is because somebody has somehow instructed or warned her that she shouldn't, or because of some kind of past situation. We'll have to wait and see what exactly goes down. But she definitely seems to be interested in avoiding that situation at all costs. I do wonder whether it's about her or whether it's about the sword, because there's definitely something going on with that sword. I mean, she is so connected to that thing that she was literally sleeping with it. So I definitely wonder what's going on there. But overall, I think that the show is going to have some very interesting mystery elements and some potential for adventure and for interesting fights. I found it especially interesting when Belle was fighting the Kraken-esque kind of creature that she was actually seeming to just float across the water, which was a really interesting design choice. And it wasn't even when she was necessarily holding the sword. She was doing this initially and organically. I don't know whether this has any tie-ins to any kind of mythological or spiritual references, especially given that I would presume this was written in Japan, but it was an interesting stylistic choice that definitely had me at least intrigued and a bit curious. Anyway, though, I thought that this was a really interesting show, and I definitely look forward to seeing where we'll go next week. But I'd love to know what you guys thought, so leave a comment below and let me know, and I'll talk to you in the next video. See you later! Bye!